Okay. Hi, everybody. Nice to see y'all. I'm going to start admitting folks here as they're joining. Nice to see y'all as you pop in here. Richard, good to see you. Where are you coming from? Michael, where are you at? Yushi, Daniel, and Robbie. Nice to see you all. We're going to have a nice time together. I'm going to share a little bit about the World Watch List and persecution around the world. It's going to be good for you. It's going to help you to expand your worldview. I have a friend who's going to help me moderate the chat box. Hi, John. Nice to see you. So she will hopefully be signing in soon so that I don't have to do too many things at once. Because, and you're going to find this out eventually anyway, I'm not very technical. Does anybody else relate? Nod your head if you know what I mean. So if this all goes well, this is going to be wonderful. But if some technology sort of gets turned around, then it might be a long night for all of us. But I'm so glad to have you here. I am going to share a little bit about myself, but I want to give people a minute or two. So let me know here in this little chat box where you're coming from. That will help me to feel like we're connected a little bit. I'm in Santa Ana, California right now. It's a beautiful day here. You know, we got sunshine down here, although it's getting a little dark, as you might imagine. I have family up in the Northwest. They tell me that it's rained a little bit, but I don't know where you're at. So let me know where you're coming from in this little chat box here, and I will respond. Okay. Terrific. Giving people just another minute here, and then we'll begin. So Richard, there you go. Why don't you sign in there and say hi? Let me know. Hey, Michael says he's up in Washington. Yep. There's a lot of rain, he says. Where in Washington, Michael? Right there in that chat box. Just let me know. I'm curious. Vancouver, Daniel and Robbie. Yushi from Beaverton. That's a nice place. Vancouver, Washington. Daniel and Robbie, you know what? When my kids were growing up, I took them to the Heathman Lodge in Vancouver, Washington. They love that place. Michael from Lake Tapps. Michael, I have family up in Lake Tapps. My mother-in-law lives up there. That's nice. I know that area well. Well, it's good that we have friends here. That's good. Okay, what am I doing here? I'm getting messages. I've been signed out, but I know I still looking at y'all. So I guess that's something else. Okay, we've given them 3 minutes. When more people sign in, we will just let them in on the group. I am going to talk for a bit about persecution around the world. And I have to, all I can do is come from the perspective of Open Doors. And it's important for you to know what is the perspective of Open Doors? What's our history? And then I'm going to talk, and I think it will help you give some perspective on our view of the world, the reach that we have. And it's hopefully then going to give you confidence that when you're getting this information, you can trust it. Now, why does that make a difference? It makes a difference because I believe God is trying to wake up the Western world, the Western church, to what is happening to the other parts of the body of Christ as regards to persecution. And I think if you pay attention, you'll see that there are shadows of what's happening around the world here in Western countries, not just the United States, but elsewhere as well. And so that's why I think it's important. As I'm going through this, you're going to have questions and I am going to have answers. But I won't know what your questions are unless you type them in the chat box. And I'm willing to take any question. If I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you I don't know the answer, but there's a good chance I might if it's in regards to the Open Doors World Watch List. Does that make sense? Nod. I see a few faces here. Nod if that makes sense. Great. All right, let me talk a little bit about Open Doors and how we began, because you may not know, but it's a dramatic story. And I hope it'll motivate you because you will see in the Open Door story God's hand. Back when the Soviet Union, 65, 70 years ago, the Soviet Union controlled a large swath of land. I won't go into too much detail explaining how that all worked, but you had a central government, communist system that had conquered territory and created what was called an Iron Curtain. And behind that Iron Curtain, they would not let any faith in God happen. And there was a man, he was a young man from Holland, from the Netherlands, he had felt a calling for the gospel, that people would have Bibles, to have the ability to read a Bible, the ability to decide for themselves what they thought about it. And he was in Bible college. And when he was in Bible college, he kept people talking about, let's reach the world. And they were talking about, let's send missionaries into this country, into that country. But one thing he noticed was they were talking about the half of the world that was open. And he asked the question, what about the other half that's closed? And his professor said, well, we're not going to worry about that. It's illegal to get behind it. God, and God really spoke to him. God spoke to this man and told him that he was to go behind the Iron Curtain to the other half of the world. Nice to welcome y'all who are joining here, talking a little bit about, nice to see you, Lori, and Judy, and all of you, talking about how Open Doors came to be. And it's important as regards to this, to what we're learning tonight. So Brother Andrew was his name. He wrote the book called God's Smuggler. Maybe you've heard of it. Sold about 14 million copies. It's been in print for, oh goodness, decades. And it's going to be a movie, a Hollywood movie, or perhaps on Netflix here in the next couple of years. It's in progress. But the story was dramatic because this one man felt a call to go behind the Iron Curtain, to go to the other half of the world, the half that can't reach the gospel. And what he did was he borrowed his neighbor's VW Bug, he stuffed it full of Bibles, and he went across the border. Now into that world, going into that world was not easy. They had border guards, they would check, they would search your car, all these kinds of things, and they were dead set against people having Bibles. So time after time after time, Andrew went into the Soviet Union, different countries, different places, and delivered Bibles. That was the beginning of Open Doors. And for over 65 years, we have been in existence, always with the same purpose, to go into those places, the dark places, the difficult places, the dangerous places, and to take these people Bibles, to help them, to work with them in whatever way we can to strengthen the church. And we call that the persecuted church. That we don't capitalize that. It's not a specific church. It's not a specific movement. You may be evangelical. You may be from any kind of different movement. I don't know. And we welcome you. We rally around people who are living and dying for the name of Jesus. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus is the central point of everything we do. So when we talk about Christians, we're talking about folks who are asked the question at the point of a gun, essentially, are you a follower of Jesus? And those people who have the courage to say, yes, we're with them. So 65 years ago, we began to take Bibles into the Soviet Union. Now, I'm going to talk about countries on this world watch list where it's just as dangerous, more dangerous than it ever was 65 years ago. And but the dynamics are different. We spread out. We went from the Soviet Union, and then of course the Soviet Union disintegrated. But we were already into China, where China had blocked Bibles and was an intense focus for Open Doors. And then we went into the Middle East, and now we're in these 70 plus countries around the world where faith is a difficult thing. So I want to talk about those countries. It would be helpful for you to have a link. And Lindy is here, and she's going to help me. Lindy, if you would put a link to the top, to the World Watch List, that would be terrific, because you may look at this list and you may have questions. And I want to answer those questions about any country on the list or countries that aren't on the list and maybe why they aren't. But I want to talk for a bit, just for a moment, about how the list is created. Then I'm going to give you the trends regarding persecution. and why those trends are important to you. Now, tomorrow I'm at 10 a.m. I'm going to talk about how these trends may affect the United States and the Western world. If this is of interest to you tonight, you may find that interesting tomorrow. But let me know. When we began to spread out around the world, we found that it was harder and harder and harder to determine where we were going to spend our focus, where we were going to spend our money in investment in the kingdom, because there's so many people who were persecuted for their faith. We began to realize there's a lot of believers in China, that there were also believers in Vietnam, and there were believers in these Arab Islamic countries like Iran and Afghanistan. And Brother Andrew had a heart for Pakistan, all of these places. So what do? We started a research unit 25 plus years ago that asked questions to believers at the grassroots level. We asked them, what kind of, do you face persecution? If so, how? At what levels? Very sophisticated research. And and now all these years later, it is the most trusted list in data, not anecdotes, data, research, incidents that we can prove regarding persecution of Christians. And the State Department uses it. Every presidential administration, since I've been here, I've gone in and briefed them and had conversations with them, brief most, if not all, of the presidential candidates as they go in to these races, because this is a trusted list. Okay. So this year has been a tough year. It's been an unusual year. And I'm going to talk about how this year has been different as according to the data and then the trends. And you all just click that list, look at the list and see what you think, and then ask questions. And I will probably talk for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter, and then we'll take questions. Not if that's okay. I see some faces here. Yeah, that's all right. Okay, good. I have to tell you, you're a handsome group. Very, very handsome group. Beautiful people. Must be nice. It must be nice. Anyway, okay. This was a difficult year. Why was it difficult? Because one of the things that we found that stuck out was that extremists and governments are using COVID-19 to persecute and to intensify the persecution of Christians. They're using it as a lever, and you may not have known this. You may not see it even in the media, even though we spent all day yesterday and the day before talking about it. Some media suppresses this story for sure. But we have found that this COVID-19 is being used as it's almost like a blanket over the top of these other problems. And here's how that is manifested. You have places like India. You have places like Nigeria. You have places like Pakistan, where people are already persecuted for different reasons. But now in the midst of this, people are using COVID as an excuse to justify persecution. It sounds something like this. In Pakistan, I was talking to one of our leaders in Pakistan, and she was deeply troubled because she kept hearing from Christian nurse after Christian nurse who was put into the COVID ward. This is before we knew anything about COVID, except that it was dangerous and we didn't know how it was spread. They were putting Christian nurses on the front lines without masks, without any sort of protection, because, and they said, quote, Christians are expendable. That's one little illustration of what I'm talking about. It's people who are day workers in India, who there might be Christians from the lowest caste, the Dalit caste. And in the midst of COVID, when all of these businesses were shut down, they were eating whatever they could eat based on what they made that day, just hand to mouth. And when they were laid off, they all had to find their way home to these villages. Millions of them, millions and millions of believers let go, along with everybody else. In that way, the pain was shared. But when they got home, they found that the central government's food and mass and all these sorts of things were being withheld from Christians because of the worldview within that country, that some of the mayors and town leaders would say, We don't want to give this to Christians because you have brought a curse upon yourself. You brought a curse upon this place. That sort of thing is happening in a regular way. So while COVID has made it a very strange and difficult year for all of us, we wouldn't even be on this. We'd be in person if it weren't for COVID. There are some believers who've had an extra measure of persecution and discrimination because of COVID. It's as though even all of the conditions within their country are difficult, and then you add this extra layer of complexity. That's new. That's new. That's unusual. But I don't think it's something that will come to a dead stop. The data doesn't seem to indicate that this is a one-time event. It's just a manifestation. There are new manifestations that come out of the conditions and the trends that we see and that I'm going to lay out for you tonight. And when you see these trends, I think you're going to be awakened as to how big a challenge this is and why the Western world needs to wake up. On December 30th, there was a group of believers that were attacked by an extremist group in the north of Nigeria. And the story it's a grave story. I don't like to tell stories like this. Believe it or not, I'm a cheerful person. I have a hard job. I see difficult things, but I also have the blessing of hearing the victories, and we should talk about that before we go. The victories and the strength of the persecuted church and all these sorts of things that are just so exciting and inspiring. But on Christmas Eve in the Borno state of Nigeria, these believers were attacked by this Islamic extremist group and they were executed. How they do this and how this group managed to attack and to kill these people is it's a picture, it's a frame by which you can see a lot of things around the world. They went into the city, they take control of the cellular networks. They have ways in which they can jam online traffic to isolate these Christian villages. Christians often live in townships and villages in the north of Nigeria together for safety. Unfortunately, it also makes them, sort of grouped together and easier to attack. If the government were effectual in defending them, then maybe it would be easier to protect them, but that hasn't been the case. So they cut off the communications. Then the Islamic extremists, Boko Haram is the name, attacked. They executed these 12. There's 2 more still missing. When they go into the town, they raided the hospital. The government had sent hospital masks, had sent all these supplies. They take it. They go to the places where the food stores for Christians have been, and they take those as well because this village is a Christian town, it's a Christian village. That's a picture of kind of what's happening from the extremist point of view. You have governments and local governments who have been withholding COVID. You have these extremists who are attacking in this COVID environment. That is new. So you can read about what's happening here in this link here to the side and the World Watch List as well. But that gives you a picture of kind of what we're up against, that we have this new thing where extremists and governments are using COVID as a justification to attack people. I like to bring it down to the personal level, and I'm going to do that. But let me talk about 3 big trends, because I've sort of hinted that we're going to talk about that. The first, I think the most important trend outside of the COVID trend is how, in a sense it's connected to it, is how these extremists are gaining ground, how they're gaining ground. We have our friend here to admit. So they're using these extremists in the north of Nigeria, for example, that I mentioned, while the governments are held in place because of these issues, having a hard time moving around, not wanting to spread the COVID thing, while the individuals are locked into their homes, these extremists are still moving across borders. Nigeria is number 9 on the World Watch List. It's a country that you should watch carefully. Several years ago, when I was working here at Open Doors, we began to get these reports from the north of Iraq. that said, hey, this church was bombed in Christmas Eve. This other church was bombed around Thanksgiving. We started to get this groundswell of attack from this strange group called the Islamic State, and we began to call attention to this, to the government, to others. This was in November, December, January, calling attention to it. Of course, we all know the story. By May and June of that year, Islamic State had captured all of the north, all of the oil, all parts of Syria, and they had created what is called a caliphate. Nigeria is right there. You have that same situation, an ISIS affiliated group. We're by the way, we're in Nigeria, so we know we have a tremendous group there. So I talk to these folks all the time, and you can trust this information. That these groups, Boko Haram, were funded by ISIS. They took a lot of that oil money. They gave them bomb making technology, and they had this ideology that says Christians are infidels. We have to push them out. And they have been attacking within the north. The country is cut into two. The northern section is all run by Sharia law states. And so they have this most virulent form, the most medieval form of Islam. And they're trying to force this onto those people who are moderate Islam, but they're attacking Christians. And now they've started to attack across into Chad, into Cameroon, up into Niger, over into a country called Burkina Faso. Some of you may know what that is. I mean, it is going to be a place to watch. When I was briefing the Biden administration over the summer, and this is the challenge we face as believers, why I want people to know that this is happening, because I think we have to communicate with our lawmakers. And this is important not just for Christians, but for everybody. But as I was talking and briefing the Biden administration, explaining this to them, the lens by which some people see persecution is that these are mafioso, that these are gang related, and they don't want to, because it's awkward to say that Islam is attacking Christians. We're not saying, by the way, that all of Islam, but there is a fraction, but it's a significant fraction that believe the most virulent form of Islam. And Islam, when I talk to Islamic leaders, what I communicate to them is that Islam has to deal with this, because this is a theological idea. And the theology is such that their most virulent interpretation of Islam gives them the justification and the right to attack and kill Christians. They feel they have that legal basis to do that. And of course, there are lots of others, maybe even 3/4 or 80% or even more of Islam that would disagree with that, but they're going to have to address that. But until they do, it's going to be up to Western governments like the US and Nigeria and its partners around Africa and France and all these places to support and protect these sacred places, churches in these countries. So when I talk to the Biden administration, they say, yes, it's about oil. It's about all these things. I don't think they are yet convinced, and we need to pray that they would be convinced that Boko Haram is attacking for the reasons they say they're attacking, which is because they want to get rid of Christians. We had the same problem in Syria and Iraq when they crisis map it at the State Department. All these smart people say, well, these are mobs, these are this and that, but they're not addressing the elephant in the room. So you have these kinds of things where extremists are gaining ground because of COVID. They're just taking advantage of it. The trend within that, of course, is that there is extremism, that the ideologies of extreme Islam have been taught. They are taught in madrasas funded by Iran or largely Saudi Arabia. They're taught, and these imams come out with this virulent idea, and they teach it on Friday afternoons. The most dangerous time in the world, around the world, is every Friday at 3:00 when the mosque is let out. And these people have heard this spoken in Egypt in these mosques, and they come out fired up, and often they will attack Christians. On Friday afternoons, I always look at my, try to see if there's been an incident in some of these places around the world. So there is a trend here where extremism is being shared and being taught, and it's spreading. And now, of course, with technology, you don't need a large group. One of the questions I get from media all the time is, I thought we defeated ISIS. And the answer is, well, yeah, ISIS no longer controls territory. But ISIS does not keep this idea does not need a capital in which to function and spread. It only needs, it has its reason to exist, and 2 or 3 people can do a lot of damage. Okay, so extremism is real, it's spreading, that's a trend. And these extremists are also then using COVID as a justification. The BBC recognizes this, they're reporting on all of this. We reported yesterday or 2 days ago that some of the information out of Somalia is that these people within Al-Shabaab, another terrorist group, different names, same idea, are saying, hey, this is the fault of Christians. This is a very common message we hear within these Islamic groups. But it's not just Islamic groups. There are also Hindu groups. We have at number 10 on the world watch list, India. India is a country, largest democracy in the world. Largest democracy in the world. But in 2014, they elected somebody who had a nationalist agenda, a radical Hindu agenda. Their prime minister, very smooth, very polished. He tries to talk around this issue, but all of his people are publicly, I mean, I've got their version of whatever CNN is. I get these updates from my friends in India. They send me like, look what they said today, that we're going to push Christians out of India by 2021 was their original goal. So it's not just Islamic, it's also Hindu radicals now are spreading, and their issues in Nepal against church. There are 65 million Christians in India, and so they are seeing this spread of radicalism in these areas. Okay, so that would be certainly one trend. Would be the spread of radicalism, and the radicalism using the COVID as a justification. I want to talk a little bit about the second trend, nationalism, that go beyond what I said about the Hindu radicals. This idea that exists that our country is about this particular religion. It's even more than just radicals. It's about the political agenda in places like India, where you have a group that is slowly trying to change what it means to be a citizen. What it means to be a citizen. You're not really Indian unless you're Hindu. We don't accept that these are Western ideas. Believe it or not, we hear this it's a remarkable pattern when you consider the gospel and where it came from. But people think that Christianity is about the United States. And so therefore they're trying to push it out. We had a pastor, his name is Gurav. He's an interesting case. I mentioned him on my press conference because he's a guy who's just working like maybe some of you. He's a pastor, and he's chugging along. He's then arrested and taken in and detained. No lawyers. This is India now. Democracy. No lawyers. Pastor Gurav's taken in. They chain him to the wall. I was in India. Oh, I don't know. It's maybe I'll say 2 years, within the last 2 years. I met with some of these pastors and saw the pictures, chained these people to a wall. And it just in shackles. I know it's hard to believe. But there's 72 of them this happened to this year that we can prove, certainly more than that. And then they just beat them. And they ask them questions like this: who supports your church? Tell us. What's your theology? Do you send your kids to summer camp? We had a situation not too long ago, and I feel sort of bad about this, but I was talking to in Congress at a congressional hearing on this, and I specifically talked about India and gave these congressmen the Foreign Intelligence Committee this data, and within a handful of hours, we had a bunch of people that were connected to us arrested, in prison, and their children imprisoned. And they said, well, you're taking your kids to camp. We hear this all the time. They're trying to snuff it out by pressuring the kids, by arresting the parents, by holding them in prison for weeks, by beating them. And it's about this idea of nationalism. What does it mean to be an Indian citizen? You have a country that has dozens, I don't even know how many versions of script, of currency. They want to make it one currency. They have multiple languages, dialects. They want to have one dialect. And in that idea of centralizing power to be an international power, they're now saying we want one faith. And you might see a movement that brings India to be called Hindustan. They're talking about it because they're that serious about it. And you'll see that. So this idea of nationalism, we have a lady named Priya. I mentioned her in my press conference. Wonderful lady. And we have all kinds of videos, and maybe Lindy would post some of these videos that you could see of these stories, dramatic stories of these believers who they're followers of Jesus, yet in the midst of this move of nationalism, they're attacked, they're beaten, some are killed. And it's not just India, it's in Nepal, it's in Bhutan, it's in all of these countries. Nationalism is a trend we have to watch. Now, you hear people talk about nationalism in the West as well. And I think it's important to address it because we always want to understand what is our first citizenship. Our first citizenship is much, and you're not going to find anybody who loves America more than I do, but our first citizenship is the kingdom. It's the kingdom. And there's good reason for that. I won't get into theology of it, but I think you all understand we are not of this world. We're not in it. We're in it, but not of it. But there's also an idea of this kingdom. And when you are in a kingdom, there's interesting principles within it, isn't there? If you're in the Bahamas, they drive like they drive in London. Why is that? Because it was once part of the kingdom. And if you go to any sort of a place that is part of the United Kingdom, you will see pictures of the Queen, and they understand, even though it's not the same place as England, you are part of the United Kingdom, and so you follow the rules of the United Kingdom. That is a citizenship idea. So when we talk about nationalism and other countries having a problem with Christians, some of it has to do with this idea that our allegiance finally is not with the United States. As proud as we are to be Americans, as much as we want it to be tidy and clean and everything be running smooth, it's not always. But I can tell you, this idea of nationalism is one to keep your eye on, and always be checking your own heart too. But Priya is an example of a woman who was a believer. Her husband lost her job, could not get another job because he was a believer. The people in the village ostracized them. They withheld food and medical care to them. And we went in there to India and got them some food, and got them the support. Open Doors remains as we were. Some of you who just popped in may not realize we are a distribution ministry. We're there to be present with believers in all the countries on the world watch list. And that means helping them. What do they need? Do they need Bibles? Do they need food? Do they need aid? Because we're here to first strengthen the church so that they can survive. And then over time, hopefully they'll thrive. Hopefully they'll grow, and by teaching and strengthening them and talking about persecution, we can help them to grow. Okay. So we have this idea of nationalism. The other big trend that's in the data, and then I'm going to talk about countries and take questions, is one to watch. And it's the biggest. I save it for the last. And that is that governments are using COVID to increase surveillance and repression on the church. the one in particular who's mastered it, and they really have mastered it, is China. And they're number 17 on the world watch list. Don't be fooled by the fact that they're number 17, because I think that China poses the greatest threat to human rights in the world today and the greatest threat to the church. Here's why I say that, even though they're number 17. When we do our scoring, we score in a number of categories. First, what is it like for the private life? If you're a believer, do you have any freedoms at all? What's it like in the family? If you're in Islam, if you come from an Islamic family, there's some places where your parents will turn on you. Your brothers or sisters could attack you if you become a Christian. So we measure family life. We measure community. Will you lose your job? We measure at the national life. Is the police going to get you? Is the border officials looking for Christians? These kinds of things. And we measure violence. We measure these 6 categories. Within China, you have a lower score of violence in the family. All that basically means is that if you become a Christian in China, the family's not likely to kick you out. They might be disappointed, especially if they're passionate communists, but there aren't that many of them. So the family scores are lower, but in every other score, it's quite high. So you're going to see China move up the list, but let's talk about the details of the surveillance, because and I want to talk about this tomorrow more in what we have to look forward to, or what shadows that we're seeing here in the West, is that they are using this surveillance in very sophisticated ways. For over about 5 years, they created a database, and the database was about what they call a civics score. Yeah, I see Caleb here and Daniel, and let's just assume that they have a civics score, and they each get 2,000 points. You're just born, you know what? You're a citizen of China. You get 2,000 points, Caleb. That's great. And with 2,000 points, you're free to get on the train, you get on the plane, all these sorts of things. So they had this database of every citizen. When you go in to buy your phone, whether it's an iPhone or whether it's from Huawei or whatever, you have to put in, you register when you register this phone. So they have your phone, they have your data, they know where you're going, they're tracking all this stuff, and they have this social score. So they have these different databases. Last year, they brought all the databases together. The street cameras, the restaurant cameras, the social score, the artificial intelligence facial recognition that they got from your phone, and they brought them all together. And guess what they did? They began to watch and monitor and keep score of how many times you went to church. So Daniel goes to church 4 times in a month. What are you doing, Daniel? Why are you going to Bible study? Why are you taking your kids to, it's illegal, Daniel, take your kids to Bible study. You can't do that. And they began to deduct from Caleb's score and deduct from Daniel's score and deduct from Richard's score, because they kept going to church, because they have put into their algorithms that Christian behavior, church attendance, taking your kids to Bible study, these kinds of things are bad for China. Now, what are the impacts of that? You can't travel the same way you were before. You might still be able to get across the country, but you're not going to get on a train, or you're not going to get on a plane. Your kids, when they apply for school, it doesn't matter what university they qualify for, they won't get in. If you have a government job, you'll lose your job. I mean, this is a major threat, because you can see with our lack of privacy and all of the things that go on, China watches all of the behaviors on social media, all these chat groups. I was talking to a believer there. I was there last year, right before COVID broke out. And I was talking to a believer, and he asked me about Tiananmen Square. Now, I had been there a couple times, and been, for weeks, and never heard anybody who was aware of Tiananmen Square and what happened there. I said, how did you find out about that? He said, well, we have this little chat group on WeChat that one or two of us are in Hong Kong or in the West, and we get these articles sent to us on WeChat. I said, well, don't they monitor that? He said, yes. Our chat group gets shut down every week to 10 days. But then we have an organizer who just repopulates in another way. I said, well, how many versions of this chat group have you had in the last year? He said, oh, about 25. I think we're on our 25th chat group this year. They're watching their WeChat. They're watching their social media. They block Facebook. They block some of these other ones. But the ones that they have, they're all censored. They're all monitored. On Easter, we had a church that was raided, and it wasn't the church itself that was raided. It was all the homes of the people, because they were watching Zoom. The government was monitoring Zoom. This church had a service. They're not allowed to have a service. They raided every building. It would be as if in the midst of this conference, imagine this, the Portland police came in and snagged you and all the other police. The National Guard raided everybody on this call. That is happening right now in China. And they're selling that information to Vietnam, their little brother in Vietnam, Communist Party, communist affiliated. Certainly North Korea will have this if they ever get their act together. Hong Kong is going to have this. Hong Kong, which, a year ago was relatively free, certainly a year and a half ago. And they're selling it to Iran. So you could have an Islamic regime that has this sort of thing. Okay, so I've talked for 40 minutes. I don't want to belabor that, and I want to take your questions. I'm going to get into it here, but let me just go through the top 10 really quick, and then we'll get into some of these other countries. North Korea is number one, most difficult place. Or they raid, they monitor everything, they control everything. There's massive amounts of people who are in labor camps. I can talk about that. I can talk some more about Iraq or Syria or Nigeria, India, China. We can talk about that. There's some unusual things going on in Egypt. Could go either way. Saudi Arabia. There's a lot going on. Mexico is on the list for number 37. So is Colombia. Only two places in our hemisphere that are on the list. There's some reasons for that. Okay, let me get in. We have links here. Lindy has been faithfully putting on the links for you to read. Interesting stuff. We don't want to overwhelm you. Okay, I'm looking here at questions. Put your questions up here, and I'm gonna take them. Lori says, I would like to know more about Ethiopia and your work there. We have adopted 3 children from Ethiopia and traveled there many times. We have family in Mekelle. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And we've been praying for them. Ethiopia is one of these places that has great possibilities, Lori. Obviously, they've had a lot of challenges in a rise in violence and extremism and sectarianism I believe I'm right by saying that, southeast of the country. Where is Mekelle? I don't know, but maybe you could let me know where that is. But Ethiopia has a lot of stability, obviously, as you well know, and some good things about it. But there is a growing sense of violence there.
Mekelle is in the north. It's where all the fighting is happening right now.
Say again?
Mekelle is in the north of Ethiopia. It's right under Eritrea.
Oh, right under Eritrea. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the family is Orthodox, but they're being denied, I think everyone though, but I don't know if it's because of the religion, they're being denied food, water, electricity right now because of the fighting that's happening in there.
They're in Ethiopia?
Yes.
Yes. So thank you for that. Ethiopia has tried to open their border area with Eritrea. Eritrea is one of those countries where people have not heard of it, but it's a very dangerous place to be a follower of Jesus. Eritrea they have grandfathered in some Orthodox churches. But there's a great deal of, it's an Islamic government that has a Sharia law concept of Islam, very extreme. And so they are pressuring any sort of evangelical movement, any sort of open movement. You're okay to exist. I'm speaking broadly here, as long as you don't do anything. We have, but the inhumanity against believers in Eritrea is intense. We have so many cases of people being held in very inhumane conditions because they were a follower of Jesus. Lori, you know some of this. It looks like I see you nodding. Do you have you been in Eritrea at all?
No, it was not safe to go.
Yeah, yeah. Just to give you an idea of the sort of challenges we have there, there's it's one time I knew how many people were held in prison in storage containers there. Now it gets quite hot. So we have several people who die for their faith, cooking essentially in these storage containers. That's Eritrea. Another case of Eritrea, we have these 7 believers, and this is a political thing I'm trying to work out with Italy. They used to be connected with Italy as a colony of sorts. And so I'm talking with the Italian government about this through our ambassador for religious liberty. But there's these believers who are arrested for, let's say, evangelizing, having a home group, this sort of thing, and they're put into prison. But it's done by the local police, and there's so much instability that these policemen may lose their job because it's not a sophisticated society. They lose track of them. So it's like me saying to you, I put you in the hole. I put you in some dark prison cell, and then I lose my job and I didn't write it down anywhere. So we have these believers. Fortunately, Open Doors is there, and we know where these believers are. And so in the general sense, we know that in these caves, they're keeping Christians. We're trying to draw attention to it. So, I mean, this is why I'm so passionate that we speak out, that we know about this, because I think we need to understand the depth of this and to be active on it. Okay. So anyway, more questions here. Thanks for asking about Ethiopia. I'm not without hope for Ethiopia, not at all. I think there's still a lot to go with Ethiopia. But I mean, obviously there are issues. Facial recognition, there we go. Okay, these are all connections here. I see that you're recording on this. Is there a play that you can review and rewatch this workshop later? I imagine so. I think that's why they're recording it, Michael. But I'm not a technical person, so you'd have to ask Mission Connection and see how they're doing. I see somebody said that they were missionaries, going to be missionaries. Oh, I know what it was. It was Family Church. They take mission trips to Mexico. There are 4 regions of Mexico where Christians are persecuted. That's why it's on the list. Oaxaca, Chiapas. There are 2 others. We can get you that information if you need it. There are obviously issues in Mexico for the general population due to the drug cartels. In this particular case, Mexico is on the world watch list because in these communities within Chiapas and Oaxaca and these 2 other regions, the drug cartels are strong, and the pastors, the Catholic bishops, are speaking out and saying, you cannot take our kids. We don't want you to ruin any more families. This is wrong. This is immoral. And they're being attacked. They're being shot. They're being killed. So it's simply that in these very rough areas, the pastors and bishops are being shot, killed, attacked, extorted, this kind of thing. So I don't think that you have to, unless you're going into Chiapas or one of these drug areas, I don't think you're any more in danger than anybody else. But I can tell you that that's true. And it's also true in the drug cartels in Colombia. That's why Colombia is on the list as well. Why are there very few countries on the world watch list in this hemisphere, in your opinion? John, thanks for that. When we measure these things, we do survey in America. We do survey in France. There have been a lot of attacks on churches in France. Catholic bishops have been shot or pastors by extremists. There's a lot of within these Islamic ghettos in France. There's some turmoil there. But when we measure across all these things, America doesn't make the cut. So that gives you a little bit of a view. If you feel like there's a growing intolerance towards Christians, if you feel like sometimes your messages are being suppressed online, or that you're not popular because you're a follower of Jesus, imagine 1,000 times worse. That's why we're not on the world watch list. That's why other countries are not, because basically we're free. Your parents aren't going to kill you for becoming a Christian. They may even celebrate it. You're not likely to lose your job. These sorts of things. Okay. I spoke with Bill McLeod, and he said they will have these sessions available for viewing in the weeks to come. Good. Okay. Family Church answered this for me. Okay. I have a few more minutes. Any more questions? You can, okay, here we go. Michael says, what about Venezuela? My grandparents were missionaries there back in the day. Things seem to be getting worse. Are there any updates on the church here? Yes. Thank you for that. We are watching Venezuela. I have a list here of those that did not quite make the list. Let's see if Venezuela is, El Salvador is on there. Let's see here. You believe it or not, and I want to seem cool to you, but I don't memorize all 100 of these bad boys. It's not possible. But let me see here. Venezuela. Honduras, certainly Venezuela here. Well, I don't see Venezuela, so I guess they're not in the top 74. Let's put it that way. But we are, I know for a fact, because we've talked about this at some length, that we are monitoring Venezuela, Cuba, these areas. We have reports from Nicaragua here. Nicaragua's moving up the list. Cuba's number 51. El Salvador likely to be, based on these that terrorist group in El Salvador. I forget, Sandinistas. These kinds of things are still existing and happening. Okay, sorry I didn't have a better answer about Venezuela. Obviously, their economy, their government's in shambles, and such a shame because they have so much wealth there. Really, I won't make any comments on communism. Just leave it there, shall we? If you're able to share, how does Open Doors minister to people inside North Korea? Caleb, are you a spy for North Korea? If you are, I'm not going to answer your question. But if you're not, okay, he confirms he's not a spy. Okay, well then let's talk about it. Let me tell you, Caleb, a story, and we have, we have all kinds of stories like this, how Open Doors has worked in the past. Can I? And then I'm going to let you draw conclusions. But we began, as I started this broadcast, I told you how we began. We began by one guy smuggling Bibles into the Soviet Union, into Russia, into all, Ukraine, all these places. He started with a VW bug. He'd hide them. Then we bought vans. I can take you to the Netherlands and show you some of these old vans. We would like create these little things. We had a camper van where it looks like an old 70s camper van, but there's hiding places everywhere. Then we created this shipping container thing that it's like a shipping truck where the floor had a conveyor belt, and we'd put Bibles on there and we'd turn the conveyor belt. We put more Bibles on. So the entire floor. Then we took over, for lack of a better way to put it, a shipping company that was taking refrigerators into the Soviet Union. And we'd take in refrigerators. We'd deliver refrigerators for 4 weeks. But guess what? The whole thing was stacked with Bibles. Okay, so that's Open Doors. Now, I'm not going to tell you how we get stuff into North Korea, but I will tell you we're very clever. And if that was what we were doing 60 years ago, you can imagine that we're going to make sure, to the best of our ability, that the North Korean people have Bibles, that they have all kinds of stuff. And I have little tools here, little secret tools. Maybe I'll show you. Here's what I'll do. This is a little SD card. I don't know if you can see it there. It could go into your phone and everything. There's a little toy, and I've got it here. I'm not going to show you because I never show it, but it's in my little area here. There's a little toy. It's made of hard plastic, and something you almost might find in a McDonald's Happy Meal, but it's used for a specific purpose. And we smuggle those. We take those in, and then we smuggle these in secretly. And those, we then pair this little toy up with this. And you know what this is 1,000 hours of teaching, scripture, sermons, whatever. And this little toy, which you can't see, is linked up with this, and we can train pastors. So that's a little cue or clue how we do that, Caleb, okay? So, and we have projects all over the world. You can always be part of it. Can you please talk about Egypt? Yeah, been to Egypt many times. Egypt is the president Assisi has improved conditions for Egypt. Egypt is number 16 on the world watch list. It's not because of government persecution. They've opened churches, they're blessing churches, they're helping the Orthodox Church, but it's because Egypt has some of the most virulent madrasas, I keep using the word virulent, but I think you understand what I mean. The Salafist universities that teach these imams that go out to this, teach all this really strong hatred. That's in Egypt. So they have this population that's been taught this radical thing. And the government is moderate now. The Muslim Brotherhood obviously was still an issue there as a political force, although they're trying to tamp it down. So I'm optimistic about Egypt. Egypt is one of those countries that always, they seem to call, they one last year, I think, or the year before, they dragged me in to their embassy, and they wanted, like, why are we on this list? We're trying to help you. But it has to do with what's happening in the countryside. If you're a Christian and you're living in a village in the north, in Upper Egypt to the south, and you could be attacked by a group and the police won't do a thing about it because the central government is not controlling everything. So Egypt, I'm not discouraged about Egypt, Richard, but I have to tell you, it's still number 16 because it's not easy to be a Christian there, and it's dangerous. If you're a Christian woman, it's really tough. Okay, 3 more minutes. Any other questions? Tomorrow, I'm going to talk at 10 a.m. about what this means for America. What do we have to cut? What do we have coming? What can we do? How can the church develop, grow, mature? There are secrets that I think I've tapped into from seeing how the church grows under persecution as opposed to shrinks, because the church can grow. China is an example of this, under persecution, but it doesn't always. Okay, so I'll talk about that tomorrow and what it means. All right. Thanks, everybody. I hope I made it interesting for you. There's more stories I probably could tell, but you probably want to go eat dinner. Now, I mentioned to you that I started to say before some of you queued in, I'm from the Northwest. I'm from Tacoma. So some of you, look, I know how it works. Seattle looks down on Portland. Portland looks down on Tacoma. Tacoma looks down on Olympia. I mean, but I'm from the Northwest. I'm one of you, okay? So I feel your pain, even though I've lived down here in California for a while. My son is up in Tacoma. So my brother's in Tacoma. He's a pastor there. Anyway, I love you all up in the Northwest. Thanks for joining in. I hope you have a great day, great evening. Enjoy yourself. Bye-bye.